Close your eyes. Let the weight of the world drift away, replaced by the cool, heavy air of a New York night nearly a century ago. Imagine you are standing in a room where the laws of physics seem to have paused, where a single, chilling truth defies everything we know about space and time. Before you, on the worn wooden floor of a quiet laundry in Harlem, lies the body of Isidor Fink. The room is silent now, save for the faint hiss of a dying gas flame. The air is thick with the scent of hot iron and damp cotton. But as the medical examiner leans in, he finds something that should not exist. Near the marks on Fink's chest and his left wrist, the skin is not just broken, it is charred. It is singed. In the language of forensics, this is a contact mark. It means that the source of the tragedy was so close that it was pressed directly against him. They were close enough to feel his breath, close enough to see the terror in his eyes. And yet, look around you. The heavy wooden door behind you is bolted shut from the inside with a solid iron bar. The windows, every single one, are not just locked, but nailed firmly into their frames from the interior. Heavy iron bars cross the glass, creating a cage of Fink's own making. There is no one else here. No one is hiding in the shadows of the vats. No one is tucked beneath the heavy pressing tables. And there is no weapon. A man met his end at point-blank range in a room that was hermetically sealed from within, by a presence that was never there, with a device that has vanished into thin air. This is the Isidor Fink Paradox. A mystery that is not just unsolved, but physically impossible. Let us travel back to that night, March 9, 1929. New York is a city in transition. We are at the height of the Harlem Renaissance, a time of jazz and light, yet beneath the surface, the first tremors of the Great Depression are beginning to shake the pavement. Isidor Fink, a 30-year-old immigrant, is a man caught between these worlds. He is a man of silences. He has no family in this towering city. No known friends. He does not consort with others. He has no known enemies among the shadows that rule the night just a few blocks away. Isidor Fink exists in a state of pathological isolation, a man who has retreated into a shell of steam and starch. Imagine the 4th Avenue Laundry at 4 East 132nd Street. It is a small, cramped space, lit by the flickering, amber glow of gas lights that cast long, dancing shadows against the walls. The air is perpetually warm and humid. You can smell the sharp, clean scent of lye, the earthy aroma of wet wool, and the cloyingly sweet smell of heated starch. Fink has spent years turning this business into a fortress. He is a man driven by an unspeakable fear, a terror of the world outside his door. He admits only the customers he knows by sight. He has spent his meager earnings on the finest locks money can buy. He has hammered nails into the window frames, ensuring that no hand can ever reach in from the night. On this night, at 10:15 p.m., Fink is at work. He is a silhouette moving through the mist of his own creation. The heavy iron on his gas stove is glowing with heat. He is pressing a shirt, the rhythmic thump hiss of the iron the only clock he follows. Outside, Harlem is a symphony of city noises, the distant rumble of a trolley car, the faint strains of a trumpet from a basement club, the muffled chatter of neighbors in the tenement upstairs. But inside the laundry, Fink is safe. He is behind his bars. He is behind his bolts. He is in a world where nothing can reach him. Or so he believes. Consider the irony of his security. Isidor Fink was so afraid of an intruder that he created the very conditions that would make his case a ghost story. He nailed his windows shut to keep the world out, only to ensure that when the end arrived, it could never be seen leaving. Imagine the humidity clinging to your skin as you stand in that laundry. See the heavy vats of water, the piles of white linen stacked like snowdrifts in the dim light. Fink moves with the practiced grace of a man who knows every inch of his prison. The door is barred. The windows are spiked. But the paradox is already in the room. It is waiting in the corner where the gas light fails to reach. It is waiting for the moment when the silence of the laundry is broken by the impossible. It is now 10:20 p.m. Next door, in the quiet of her own apartment, a neighbor named Mrs. Lachlan Smith is settling in for the night. Suddenly, the silence is shattered. Through the wall, Mrs. Smith hears the unmistakable sounds of a violent struggle. It isn't just the rustle of movement, it is a chaotic, desperate symphony. The heavy thud of a body hitting a pressing table. The shatter of a glass basin. And then, the cries for help. They are not the sounds of someone surprised by a single moment. They are the cries of someone who is fighting, someone who is aware of an assailant, someone who is looking into the face of their own end. Terrified, Mrs. Smith runs into the hallway. She finds a local patrolman, Officer Albert Cattenborn, walking his beat. She is breathless, pointing toward the laundry, her voice trembling as she tells him that a struggle is happening inside Fink's fortress. Officer Cattenborn approaches the door. He knocks. There is no answer. Only the silence of the hermetic seal. He tries the handle. It does not budge. He throws his weight against the wood, but the internal bolts, the very bolts Fink installed for his protection, hold firm. Cattenborn moves to the windows. He peers through the iron bars, his breath fogging the glass. He sees the nails driven into the frames. He sees the clutter of the laundry, but he cannot see the man on the floor. He looks up. Above the main door, there is a small transom window. It is a narrow, hinged pane of glass, used for ventilation. It is open, just a crack. But as Cattenborn measures it with his eyes, he realizes the first impossibility of the night. The opening is far too small for him. It is too small for any adult man to traverse. The intruder could not have come through here. And they certainly could not have left through here. A crowd has begun to gather in the cold March air. Among them is a young boy, small and slight. Cattenborn hoists the boy up toward the transom. Climb through, he commands. Unbolt the door. Imagine being that child. Being pushed through a narrow gap into a dark, steaming room where you know something terrible has happened. Your feet dangle for a moment in the humid air before you drop onto the floor. The boy reaches up. He slides the heavy iron bar. He turns the lock. The door swings open. Officer Cattenborn enters, his hand resting on his service device. He expects a struggle. He expects to find a hiding presence. But the room is empty. Fink is there, lying 10 meters from the door. He has sustained serious injuries. A third mark is found on his left wrist, a defensive gesture, as if he had raised his hand to shield himself. The gas stove is still lit. The iron is still hot. Cattenborn begins a frantic search. He looks behind the heavy vats of lye. He tears apart the piles of laundry. He checks the ceiling, the floorboards, the walls. There is no one. He goes to the windows. He pulls at them. They are still nailed shut. He stands over the body and looks for a weapon. He expects it to be near Fink's hand. He expects it to be tucked in a corner. But there is no weapon. He checks Fink's pockets. They are full of cash. He checks the register. It is untouched. This was not a robbery. This was not a self-inflicted act. Cattenborn stands in the center of the room, the flickering gaslight dancing in the sweat on his forehead. He realizes that he is standing in a locked vault that has just been the site of a tragedy, and the only other person who was here has simply ceased. The paradox has been set. A man has met his end from contact range marks in a room where every exit was bolted from the inside. How can a presence be close enough to singe your skin, yet be far enough away to never have existed in the room at all? The mystery is only beginning. The silence of the 4th Avenue laundry did not last. By midnight, the damp heat of Isidor Fink's fortress was pierced by the harsh, artificial glare of magnesium flashes. Homicide detectives, men in heavy wool overcoats and brimmed hats, moved like ghosts through the settling steam. Among them, a figure of particular gravity arrived, Commissioner Edward Mulrooney. He stood in the center of the room, his eyes tracing the impossible geometry of the space. Mulrooney was a man of logic, a man who believed that every event left a signature, a physical breadcrumb leading back to a human hand. But as he looked at the scene, he felt the foundations of that logic beginning to crumble. The systematic dismantling began. The detectives were not content with a simple search, they were looking for a rift in reality itself. They moved the heavy pressing tables, their iron legs screeching against the wood. They emptied the vats of lye and starch, searching for a sunken object that was not there. They took crowbars to the floorboards, prying up the planks to see if an intruder, or a device, had been secreted away in the dust of the foundations. They found nothing but the silence of the earth. They turned their attention to the walls. They tapped every brick, looking for a hollow sound. They climbed ladders to inspect the ceiling, tracing every inch of the plaster for a trapdoor or a vent. But the ceiling was solid, a canopy of undisturbed grime and age. Commissioner Mulrooney oversaw it all, his frustration mounting with every clear report from his men. He was trapped in a logical loop. The forensic evidence of the singed skin demanded that someone had stood right here, mere inches from Isidor Fink. Yet the physical state of the room, the bolted door, the windows nailed firmly into their frames, insisted that no such person could have ever existed within these walls. Imagine the commissioner standing by that door, sliding the heavy iron bolt back and forth, testing its weight. It required a human hand. It required intent. It was a manual seal, a final statement of, "Keep out." And yet, the presence it was meant to keep out had already come and gone, leaving the lock exactly as it had been found. Mulrooney would later admit to the press that the case was an insoluble mystery. The investigation moved from the steam of the laundry to the cold, clinical silence of the findings. The analysis of Isidor Fink was a desperate search for a story that made sense. The experts focused first on the left wrist. There, they found a through-and-through mark. In the quiet language of pathology, this was a defensive gesture, a final, instinctive act of a man raising his hand to shield his face. It tells us that Fink saw his end coming. He was not targeted from afar, he was confronted. But then came the soot. The paradox of proximity. Around the marks on Fink's chest and his wrist, the skin was charred. Tiny grains of unburnt residue were embedded in the flesh. This only happens when the event occurs at point-blank range. The source must have been pressed against Fink's clothing, or held so close that the heat of the blast scorched his skin. This was the final challenge to the transom theory. Some detectives had hoped that the intruder had stood on a ladder outside, acting through the narrow gap above the door. But an event occurring through the transom, meters away from where Fink fell, would never leave such marks. Only something from within the room could brand the body in this way. The soot was the proof of presence. The bolted door was the proof of absence. The experts looked for other signs. Was there a struggle? Yes, the neighbor had heard the sounds and the crashing of furniture. But when the police entered, the room was remarkably orderly. It was as if a violent storm had occurred in a vacuum. And then, the final, haunting question, the missing device. A man cannot sustain such injuries in a struggle and then dispose of the device while his strength ebbs away. As the months turned into years, the Isidor Fink case became a playground for the imagination. Theories rose like the steam from Fink's vats, each attempting to bridge the gap between the scorched skin and the locked door. First, consider the living dead theory. Investigators looked for a precedent. They looked toward a famous case in Edinburgh, where a man had sustained a major injury to the head. Despite the trauma, the man stood up. He walked 165 yards in a circle. He walked back to his location and calmly told the staff he was going upstairs. He lived for hours before finally succumbing. Could Isidor Fink have been injured in the hallway? Could he have found the strength in his final seconds to stagger inside, slam the door, and slide the heavy iron bolt into place? It would explain the lock. It would explain the lack of a device. But the experts remained steadfast. The injuries to Fink's chest would have caused a collapse so sudden that such physical exertion would be a medical miracle. Then there is the theory of the small assassin. The transom window above the door was found with a broken hinge. Could a child, or a person of extraordinarily slight build, have wriggled through that narrow gap, committed the deed, and escaped the same way? But why? And if they did leave through the transom, how did they bolt the door behind them from the outside? The police attempted to solve this with the mechanical trick. Detectives spent hours with strings and poles, trying to pull the bolt into place from the outside through the transom window. But the friction was too great. The string would snap. The angle was raw. The fortress did not allow for the elegant tricks of a mystery novel. And so, we arrive at more mysterious perspectives. Charles Fort looked at the Fink case and saw a break in the world. He spoke of teleportation and the failure of physical laws. He believed that Isidor Fink's tragedy was a moment where a person or an object simply ceased to be in one space and began to be in another, leaving no trail but the scorched skin and the bolted door. Nearly a century has passed since that cold March night in 1929. The Fourth Avenue laundry is gone now, the vats of lye and the heavy iron stoves replaced by the brick and glass of a modern city. The scent of starch has been washed away by the rains of 100 seasons. But the paradox of Isidor Fink remains. He was a man who spent his entire life building a cage. He was driven by a fear we may never truly understand. He nailed his windows shut to keep the darkness out, but in doing so, he ensured that when the end finally found him, it would be forced to stay. Isidor Fink passed away in a room of his own making, a fortress that became his resting place. As you drift now toward sleep, think of the laundry not as a place of tragedy, but as a place of absolute, final quiet. The mystery is not a burden to be solved, but a secret to be kept. Some doors are meant to stay bolted. Some questions are meant to remain unanswered. The steam has settled. The lights have flickered out. The fortress is finally at peace. Let the world outside fade away, just as the presence faded from that room. You are safe. You are settled. The paradox is at rest. Sleep now. Sleep. Sleep.